Do you remember when PlayStation games only showed up on a PlayStation? Well, those days are over. Sony's putting games on PC, on Xbox, and on the Switch. And now they're planning to do a lot more. They're hiring a new exec, someone whose whole job will be getting PlayStation Studios games onto platforms like Steam, Xbox, and yes, even Nintendo. Sony's walls are coming down. Meanwhile, Nintendo's holding firm. So what gives? Why is Sony moving beyond PlayStation? And why won't Nintendo follow? Hey, I'm Tonic, and this is Legend of Potato, the channel where we break down the power moves behind the Banandium gems. So, Sony's opening the gates. PlayStation games are landing on Switch. And Nintendo's just like, cool, thanks, bro. Then Sony asks, your turn, maybe toss us a little Mario. And Nintendo goes, yeah, nah, we're good. So what's really going on here? Today we're breaking down Sony's multi-platform push and why Nintendo won't touch that with a 10-foot fire flower. If that sounds like your cup of tea, hit subscribe, smash that like, and let me know what PlayStation game you'd want on Switch. Let's get into it. Sony has started to expand where its first-party games are available, and that shift is more substantial than it might appear. Historically, PlayStation titles were tied closely to Sony's hardware. First-party games were a major reason to own a PlayStation, and that exclusivity was part of the platform's identity. That's changing. Sony has posted a job listing for a senior director of multi-platform and account management. The role involves managing partnerships with Steam, Epic, Xbox, mobile games, and Nintendo. The description specifically mentions expanding PlayStation Studios games onto non-PlayStation platforms. This shift has already begun, with several PlayStation titles making their way to other platforms in recent years. MLB The Show, developed by Sony's San Diego studio, now launches on Switch annually. This started as a licensing obligation from the MLB, but Sony has maintained it as part of their publishing strategy. LEGO Horizon Adventures is another example, a reimagined family-focused version of the Horizon franchise, published by Sony and released on Switch. More legacy titles are following. In 2025, Patapon 1 and 2 Replay and Everybody's Golf, both Sony IP, will appear on Switch, published by Bandai Namco. What these examples have in common is their scope. None are new flagship releases. They're either spin-offs, older titles, or games aimed at broader audiences. This appears to be a selective approach. Rather than moving all content off platform, Sony is testing where older or less platform-dependent games can succeed elsewhere without affecting console sales. The logic is simple. Once a game has sold most of what it will on PlayStation, a wider release may bring in additional revenue with minimal cost. And for multiplayer games in particular, launching on multiple platforms can help maintain a larger, more active player base. This doesn't mean Sony plans to publish everything everywhere. Titles like God of War, Ragnarok, or The Last of Us are still closely tied to PlayStation branding and will likely remain platform exclusive for the foreseeable future. Sony's goal seems to be finding a middle ground, keeping its highest value content tied to its consoles while using selected IP to grow reach and revenue beyond its traditional base. With Sony expanding to new platforms, it's fair to wonder why Nintendo hasn't done the same. The reason is simple. Their business is built differently. Nintendo develops both the games and the hardware, and the two are tightly connected. When a game like Tears of the Kingdom launches, it doesn't just sell millions of copies, it also drives new hardware sales. Unlike Sony or Microsoft, Nintendo typically makes a profit on every console sold, so when a major game moves hardware, that's direct profit, not just a means to an end. It's a reinforcing system. Software drives hardware, and hardware increases software adoption. And the numbers speak for themselves. Nintendo's first-party games routinely outperform Sony's in lifetime sales. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe has sold more than any PlayStation exclusive. Animal Crossing, Smash Ultimate, and Tears of the Kingdom are all in the 20 to 30 million range. Sony's best-selling exclusive, Marvel's Spider-Man on PlayStation 4, with 22.7 million units sold. Now that's across all PlayStation generations. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe has sold 68 million and only on one system. Porting something like Breath of the Wild to PlayStation might generate short-term profit, but it would undercut the incentive to buy a Switch. That weakens their hardware-software loop. There's also the way their games are designed. Nintendo titles often rely on the unique features of their hardware. Mario Kart uses tilt steering. WarioWare incorporates motion and rumble. Captain Toad includes touchscreen puzzles. Those elements don't always translate well to other controllers or setups. The hardware isn't just a delivery method, it's part of the experience. So while Sony is expanding their reach to bring in more players, Nintendo has stayed focused on maintaining control over its ecosystem. And for them, that strategy continues to deliver strong results without needing to change course. Sony's recent multi-platform moves have caught a lot of attention. But despite appearances, they've been extremely selective and deliberate in how they're approaching it. Look at the PC strategy. God of War, Spider-Man, Horizon Zero Dawn. Each of those titles spent over a year as PlayStation exclusives before making the jump. That window allowed Sony to maximize the game's role in selling hardware before making it available elsewhere. The way Sony times these releases suggests they are trying to expand gradually without undermining their existing business. PlayStation Studios' leadership has been clear that high-profile exclusives will continue to debut on PlayStation first. The company is still relying on those games to drive console sales, and while they're open to broader publishing, they're doing it in ways that preserve the identity of the platform. This is different from Microsoft's model, where games are built to work across devices from day one. Sony isn't following that approach. They're exploring opportunities on other platforms, but they are doing it cautiously, prioritizing projects that won't interfere with their core strategy. Even the new multi-platform role they're hiring for points to this direction. It's focused on managing relationships and evaluating where games can succeed off-platform, not shifting the entire business overnight. Sony's expanding its reach, but only where it makes sense. They're still anchoring most of their major IP to PlayStation, and for now, that approach hasn't changed. They're adjusting slowly and watching closely. If Nintendo ever adopted a multi-platform strategy, the biggest shift wouldn't be technical. It would be structural. Right now, Nintendo controls almost every part of the value chain. They develop the game, manufacture the hardware, sell it directly, and profit at every stage. That control allows for tight cost management, consistent user experience, and a strong brand identity tied to a single platform. If they started launching games on PlayStation or Xbox, hardware sales would likely decline, and the company would need to replace that margin, probably by increasing game prices, introducing subscriptions, or altering how their content is distributed. They'd also become more dependent on external storefronts and competing ecosystems. That means splitting revenue with Sony, Microsoft, and others while giving up the leverage that comes from exclusivity. There's also risk in the way games are shipped. Coordinating across multiple platforms adds complexity, timing, patches, and certification. Nintendo avoids those issues today because it controls the entire stack. Over time, this shift would likely require cultural changes inside Nintendo as well. Teams would have to rethink priorities and workflows to fit a different business model. It would represent a major departure from how Nintendo currently operates, and one they haven't shown any interest in pursuing. In conclusion, Sony is building bridges. Nintendo is guarding the castle. One's betting on reach, the other's betting on control. And what's wild is, they're both winning. But the landscape is shifting. Player habits are changing, and as Sony inches closer to becoming a publisher first and a platform second, the question isn't if Nintendo will follow. It's what happens if Sony decides to stop waiting. Will the pressure ever be strong enough to force Nintendo's hand? Or will they be the last console maker standing because they never play by anyone else's rules? If you still believe in Nintendo Magic and want more takes like this one, subscribe to Legend of Potato and be part of a community that actually gets it.